They offered her for half price, but no one dared bid, until a lone cowboy raised his hand. The sun rose slowly over the small town of Red Creek, casting long golden shadows across the dusty streets. It was market day, and the townspeople had already begun gathering in the open square, carrying baskets, leading horses, and pushing wagons filled with all kinds of goods. The smell of fresh hay mixed with the tang of livestock, and the sound of voices, laughter, and the occasional bray of a mule filled the air. For most people in the town, this was a day of opportunity, of trade, and of showing off the best they had to offer. But for Clara, today was something else entirely. It was the day she would be placed on the auction block and her stomach twisted with a mix of fear and hope. Clara had grown up on a small farm outside the town, but her life had not been easy. Her parents had fallen ill, leaving her alone to fend for herself, and she had no close relatives who could take her in. When the town officials learned of her situation, they decided to offer her services to anyone willing to care for her and provide work in return. It was a harsh reality, and the idea of being offered for half price made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had heard the whispers already, the cautious glances of the townspeople who were unsure what to make of her. She was not an object to be sold, but in the eyes of the crowd, that was exactly how it might seem. Clara took a deep breath and tried to steady her nerves as she walked toward the wooden platform that had been set up in the middle of the square. The auctioneer, a tall man with a voice like gravel and a quick tongue, stepped forward and began calling out the offerings for the day. He described livestock, farm tools, and other items with practiced ease, his words rolling over the crowd like a wave. Then, finally, he reached Clara. He cleared his throat and announced her name, describing her as a young woman capable of helping with farm work, household chores, and any labor required, offered at half the usual price. His words were loud and clear, but they felt strange and cold, as if the entire world had been reduced to a single transaction. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she looked out over the crowd, hoping to see at least one friendly face. But all she saw were eyes filled with hesitation, curiosity, and a touch of fear. The crowd was unusually quiet considering the lively nature of the market. People whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others frowning, and a few avoiding eye contact altogether. Many of the townsfolk were kind-hearted, but even the kindest among them hesitated. They did not know Clara, did not know what her life had been like, and they worried about taking responsibility for her. What if she could not handle the work? What if her health failed? What if they were unable to provide for her? These questions echoed in their minds, and their fears kept them silent. Clara, sensing their unease, tried not to shrink back, even though she wanted to disappear beneath the platform and hide from their eyes. She stood tall, gripping the edge of the wooden railing, her fingers brushing against the rough, splintered wood as if it could anchor her in place. She could hear snippets of conversation from the crowd. "She's too young for heavy work," one man muttered under his breath. "What if she can't handle the chores?" whispered a woman nearby. Clara's cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. She wanted to shout, to tell them she could do more than they thought, that she was capable of hard work and loyalty, but no words came out. She had learned long ago that sometimes courage was quiet. Sometimes the only thing you could do was wait and hope that someone saw your worth. The auctioneer glanced at Clara and then back at the crowd, raising an eyebrow as if to encourage someone to make the first bid. He repeated the offer, emphasizing that she was available at half price, hoping to spark interest. Still, the silence lingered. The air felt heavy, thick with hesitation. Clara could feel her heartbeat in her throat, each beat echoing like a drum. She thought about her parents, about the small farm where she had spent her childhood running through fields and tending to animals. She thought about the chores she had done, the meals she had prepared, and the dreams she had once held close to her heart. All of it seemed distant now, as if someone else's life had been laid out on the auction block, and she was simply a spectator to her own fate. As the minutes dragged on, Clara began to notice the subtle glances from some of the younger townsfolk. A few children stared curiously, tilting their heads as if trying to understand why the grown-ups were so afraid. She could almost see the innocence in their eyes, untainted by fear or judgment. It gave her a small measure of comfort, a reminder that not everyone saw her as a commodity. Some still looked at her with kindness, though most avoided her gaze. Clara drew in a deep breath, steadying herself against the rising tide of anxiety. She had survived hardship before, and she knew that patience and quiet strength were often the most valuable tools a person could have. She tried to focus on the bright details around her, to distract from the worry gnawing at her. The sunlight reflected off the polished hooves of the horses nearby, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of hay and wildflowers from the outskirts of town. Birds chirped in the trees lining the square, seemingly unaware of the human tension below. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, imagining herself tending to animals in the cool morning air, laughing and working alongside someone who trusted her. She clung to that thought, allowing it to bring a measure of hope into her chest. It was a small flame, but it was enough to keep her going. The auctioneer, sensing that the crowd was still hesitant, began pacing back and forth, his boots crunching against the dry dirt. He raised his hand and gestured toward Clara, emphasizing her abilities and the benefits of having her help. "She is quick, attentive, and willing to learn," he said, projecting his voice over the hushed murmurs. "Anyone willing to give her a chance will find a loyal and capable helper." Still, the crowd remained silent, their caution holding them back. Clara could feel the weight of their indecision pressing down on her, and she tried to remind herself that courage sometimes meant standing still, even when no one was cheering for you. Hours could have passed in that tense moment, though it was only minutes. Clara felt the sun warm her back and the dust cling to her clothes. She noticed the slight frowned lines on the auctioneer's face, the shifting weight of people standing in place, unwilling to commit. Her hands ached slightly from gripping the railing, but she did not let go. She had learned that life often tested patience in quiet ways, and this was one of those moments. She reminded herself that her value was not measured by fear, by hesitation, or by the price someone was willing to pay. She was more than a number, more than a bargain, and she had to believe that someone would see that. Among the crowd, she began to notice a few heads turning, people exchanging quiet words. There was curiosity in their eyes now, mixed with wonder. Who would be brave enough to step forward? Who would see her not as a half-price offer, but as a person with heart, skill, and potential? Clara felt a flicker of hope, fragile but persistent, that someone might rise above fear. She took another deep breath, letting it fill her lungs with strength and determination. She could not control who would bid, but she could control how she held herself. She could not control the crowd, but she could control her courage. And sometimes, that was all it took to change the course of a life. As the auctioneer prepared to speak again, the crowd held its breath. All around, there was an almost tangible tension, a sense of waiting for the right moment, for the right person to step forward. Clara's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a sign, a spark of recognition, someone who might see her as more than a price tag. Her heart thumped, and she felt a quiet resolve settle over her. She would wait. She would stand, and she would hope that courage, whether hers or someone else's, would finally break the silence. The crowd remained unusually quiet, their murmurs barely rising above the soft shuffle of boots on the dusty ground. Clara stood on the platform, her hands gripping the rough wooden rail, trying to steady her trembling fingers. She had been here for what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes. Each second stretched endlessly, filled with the weight of expectation and fear. The auctioneer, sensing the hesitation, cleared his throat and called her name once more, emphasizing her skills, her willingness to work, and the unbeatable price. But still the crowd stayed silent, the energy heavy and uneasy, like a storm waiting to break. Clara's mind wandered as she tried to understand the fear in their eyes. She saw parents gripping the hands of their children, farmers shifting their weight uncomfortably, and older men with skeptical frowns etched deep into their weathered faces. She noticed their careful glances, as if they were calculating the risk of bringing her into their homes and lives. Each hesitation cut a little deeper than the last, and Clara felt a sting of loneliness, a reminder that no one seemed willing to take a chance on her. She wanted to tell them that she was strong, that she could work hard, and that she could contribute to their lives in meaningful ways. But the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she drew in a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm and to hold on to hope. Some of the townspeople whispered to each other, voices low but urgent. "She's too young for the kind of work we need done," one said quietly, shaking his head. "What if she falls sick or can't handle the chores?" another added. Clara's ears picked up the words, each one a small jab at her worth. She felt her chest tighten, but she refused to let her fear show. She had faced hardship before, and she knew that being afraid did not solve anything. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin slightly, trying to meet the gaze of anyone who looked her way. Her eyes searched for a glimmer of kindness, some sign that someone would see her as more than a bargain. The auctioneer paced behind her, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust with each step. He raised his hands, gesturing toward her, trying to encourage a bid. "She is hard-working, reliable, and quick to learn," he said loudly, projecting his voice so that everyone in the square could hear. "Any family or farm that chooses her will find a loyal helper. Don't miss this opportunity." The words were clear and full of promise, but they seemed to fall on deaf ears. The people's hesitation only deepened, their silence now heavier, almost suffocating. Clara could feel their judgment pressing down on her, but she refused to show how it affected her. She reminded herself that courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and patient. Clara's thoughts drifted to her past, to the small farm where she had grown up. She remembered waking before sunrise, tending to the animals, feeding the chickens, and milking the cows. She remembered the long days in the fields, planting seeds, pulling weeds, and gathering vegetables for her family's table. She remembered the evenings spent by the fireplace, reading the few books they owned and dreaming of a life where she could be independent and strong. All these memories reminded her that she had worked hard all her life, and that she was capable of more than anyone in the crowd might believe. Dear Jews still wait for someone willing to see that. Some children in the crowd had begun to gather at the edges, their curious eyes watching Clara intently. Unlike the adults, they did not judge or hesitate. They were drawn by her quiet determination and the way she stood on the platform, brave despite the uncertainty. One little boy whispered to his sister, pointing at Clara. "She looks like she could do anything," he said, his voice full of awe. Clara noticed them and gave a small, encouraging smile, feeling a brief warmth in her chest. Even in the midst of fear and hesitation, there were those who saw her strength, and that small acknowledgement was enough to keep her going. The older townsfolk, however, remained unconvinced. They whispered among themselves, debating whether anyone should take responsibility for Clara. "What if she isn't healthy enough for the long days on the farm?" one asked. "We can't take chances," another replied. The conversations grew quieter as the auctioneer continued, urging someone to bid. He emphasized her ability to learn quickly, her willingness to help in any task, and the fact that she came at half the usual price. Still, the crowd's fear and doubt outweighed curiosity and courage, leaving Clara feeling more isolated with each passing moment. Clara's fingers tightened around the railing. She felt the rough wood dig into her palms, grounding her in the present. She reminded herself that this was not a reflection of her worth. The hesitation of the townspeople said more about their fears than about her abilities. She closed her eyes for a moment and imagined a life where someone believed in her, someone willing to give her a chance and see her as capable. The vision gave her strength. It made her stand a little taller, her chest a little prouder. She could not control the crowd, but she could control her own courage. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the heat made the dust swirl around the square. Clara felt the warmth on her skin, a reminder that life moved forward whether the crowd acted or not. She noticed the way the wind tugged gently at her hair and the distant sound of birds singing in the trees. For a brief moment she allowed herself to imagine walking through fields under that same sun, tending to animals, learning new skills and growing stronger with each day. That dream became a shield against the uncertainty surrounding her. It reminded her that even if no one stepped forward now, there was a future waiting somewhere, and she would reach it. The auctioneer raised his hand again, calling for bids. His voice carried across the square, filled with a mixture of hope and urgency. "Do not miss this chance," he shouted. "She is young, willing, and able." A loyal helper at half the price. The crowd shifted slightly, some glancing at one another, unsure of how to respond. Clara's heart raced. Every second felt like an eternity. She wondered if anyone would have the courage to see her potential, to step past fear and hesitation, and take a chance on her. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside a quiet hope flickered, small, but persistent. As minutes dragged on, Clara began to notice subtle changes in the crowd. A few people leaned forward, curious but still hesitant. Others whispered among themselves, debating quietly. The tension was thick, almost tangible, and it seemed that the entire town was holding its breath. Clara's eyes scanned every face, searching for a sign that someone would rise above doubt and fear. She thought about all the hard work she had done, the perseverance she had shown, and the quiet strength that had carried her this far. She knew she could survive this moment, even if it meant standing alone for a little while longer. Despite the hesitation, Clara refused to let herself despair. She reminded herself that patience and courage were often intertwined, that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones fought in silence. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and looked out over the square with quiet determination. She could feel the weight of the townspeople's eyes upon her, but she would not let it crush her spirit. She was more than a half-price offer. She was a person with dreams, skills, and heart. And she would wait, hoping that one day someone would see her the way she saw herself. The sun continued to climb, casting longer shadows and painting the dusty square in warm golden light. The auctioneer called her name again, urging someone to bid, but still no one stepped forward. Clara felt a mixture of frustration and hope. She understood why people hesitated, but she also believed that courage and kindness could appear when least expected. She reminded herself that life had a way of surprising those who waited with patience and resilience. And so, she stood tall, silent but strong, holding on to the flicker of hope that someone, anyone, would finally break the silence and believe in her. The dusty square seemed to hold its breath as the auctioneer repeated Clara's offer once more. The words felt heavy, echoing over the hushed crowd. She is young, hard-working, and capable. Offered at half price for anyone willing to give her a chance. The sun blazed overhead, making the dust swirl around Clara's feet as she stood on the platform. Her hands, roughened slightly from gripping the railing for support, trembled just a little, though she tried to hide it. She had endured this tension before, but now it felt different. This moment more than any other seemed like a crossroads, one that would change her life completely. The crowd continued to shift uneasily. Farmers exchanged glances, their hands hovering near their wallets, as though the very thought of responsibility weighed them down. Some whispered quietly, saying the same things over and over, unsure if anyone dared to act. She's too young. What if she can't handle the work? Better wait for someone else to step up. Clara's heart sank a little with each passing whisper, but she refused to look defeated. She reminded herself that patience and hope often took time to find a voice in the world. She straightened her back, lifting her chin, and tried to breathe steadily, focusing on staying present. And then, through the restless murmur of voices, she noticed movement at the far end of the square. A figure emerged from the back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a calm and measured pace. The figure's boots kicked up small clouds of dust as he approached, his hat tilted slightly over his face. Even from a distance, Clara could see the quiet confidence in the way he walked. The kind of self-assuredness that seemed to belong only to someone who had lived many hard, honest days under the sun. He was a cowboy, known in the town simply as Luke, a man of few words but strong actions, respected for his courage and fairness. Luke stopped a few feet from the platform, his eyes scanning the auctioneer, the crowd, and finally settling on Clara. He raised his head, his gaze steady and unwavering, and without a hint of hesitation, he lifted his hand. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. The crowd stirred, a ripple of surprise running through them. A lone hand raised, cutting through the sea of doubt and fear, a signal that someone dared to step forward. The auctioneer's eyes widened, and he leaned forward slightly, as if not quite believing that someone had the courage to act. Whispers spread quickly. "He's bidding." "He's bidding!" People turned toward Luke, astonishment written on their faces. None of them had expected this. Luke's hand remained raised, firm and unwavering. He met Clara's eyes briefly, a small, reassuring smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It was not a smile of pity, but of recognition. Recognition that she was more than the situation she had been placed in. Clara felt warmth rise in her chest. For the first time in what felt like hours, she sensed that someone truly saw her, not as a half-price offer, not as a burden, but as a person capable of growth, of work, of life. The tension that had weighed down the square seemed to lift just slightly, replaced with a stirring of hope. The auctioneer clapped his hands, his voice booming across the square. "We have a bid!" "A bid for Clara," the crowd murmured in astonishment, some even smiling quietly, realizing that someone had finally dared to step forward. Luke did not speak. He did not need to. His actions carried more weight than any words ever could. He understood what many in the crowd had forgotten, that courage was often quieter than fear, and kindness could appear in the most unexpected moments. Clara's eyes glistened with emotion. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. For now, a look of gratitude and hope had to be enough. As the auctioneer called for confirmation, Luke nodded slightly, signaling his commitment. The gavel came down with a sharp, decisive sound, sealing the bid. Clara's heart pounded as relief and disbelief washed over her. She had been waiting for this moment, though she had never dared to hope it would come so soon. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to relax slightly. Murmurs of admiration and approval rippled through the square. People realized that this man, a lone cowboy known for his quiet strength, had done what they had been too fearful to do. It was a small but powerful lesson in courage and humanity. Luke stepped closer to the platform, moving with the same calm assurance that had captured Clara's attention from the start. He offered his hand to her, not a hand of ownership or command, but a hand of guidance and trust. Clara took it, feeling the rough warmth of his calloused palm, a reminder that hard work and integrity often came together. He smiled again, and this time Clara felt her courage strengthen, matching his quiet determination. She realized that this was more than a transaction. It was the beginning of a partnership, built on respect and the willingness to believe in one another. The crowd, now fully aware of the significance of this moment, watched as Clara stepped down from the platform with Luke's support. Children pointed excitedly, whispering to their parents about the bravery of both the young woman and the cowboy. Some of the older townsfolk nodded in approval, their skepticism replaced with a quiet respect for the man who had dared to act. Clara's cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and relief. For the first time that day she felt seen, recognized and valued. The fear that had weighed on her for so long seemed to lift, replaced with a flicker of hope and anticipation for the life that might come next. As Luke led her through the crowd, the whispers continued. But now they were different, filled with curiosity and admiration rather than hesitation and doubt. Clara noticed how he moved with quiet confidence, speaking only when necessary, and always with a calm, reassuring tone. He did not boast or draw attention to himself. He simply acted, and in that action he inspired trust. Clara felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. She realized that sometimes it only takes one person willing to see the potential in another to change the course of a life. And today, Luke had been that person for her. They walked together through the busy market, Clara's steps growing steadier with each stride. She felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. What would life be like beyond the auction block? What challenges would she face on the ranch with Luke? Her mind raced with possibilities, but beneath it all, a quiet certainty settled in her heart. She had been given a chance, and she would honor it. Luke's steady presence reminded her that courage, kindness, and trust could guide her through the uncertainty ahead. As they left the square, the townspeople began returning to their routines. But the story of the lone cowboy and the young woman who had been offered at half price lingered in the air. It became a topic of conversation, a story to tell children, a reminder that sometimes The smallest act of bravery could make the biggest difference. Clara looked up at Luke, and for the first time she felt a sense of belonging and possibility. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also filled with hope, guidance, and the promise of hard work rewarded with respect and care. Clara's thoughts drifted to the farm she had grown up on, the long days of labor, and the quiet evenings of reflection. She realized that all those experiences had prepared her for this moment, for the opportunity to learn, grow, and contribute in a meaningful way. And now, with Luke by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She understood that courage and trust were not always loud. Sometimes they were quiet, steady, and patient, and she had been fortunate enough to witness it firsthand. The sun continued to rise higher, casting long shadows over the dusty streets of Red Creek. Clara felt the warmth on her face, a gentle reminder that a new chapter of her life had begun. She looked at Luke, who remained calm and steady, and felt a sense of gratitude that words could not fully express. Today she had been given a chance, and with it came the opportunity to prove her worth, to grow stronger, and to live a life filled with purpose. The auction square faded behind her, replaced with the promise of a future shaped not by fear, but by courage, trust, and the kindness of a single man who had dared to raise his hand. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon as Clara and Luke arrived at the ranch. The air was crisp and smelled of earth and fresh hay. The wooden fences stretched in neat lines, enclosing fields dotted with horses grazing lazily and chickens pecking at the ground. Clara felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with anticipation. This was a new beginning, a place where she could learn, grow, and prove herself. She took a deep breath, letting the cool morning air fill her lungs, and felt a small thrill of excitement. She had been given a chance, and she intended to make the most of it. Luke led her toward the main farmhouse, a modest but sturdy building with a wraparound porch and wide windows that let in the morning light. The front yard was tidy with flower beds on either side of the path and a vegetable garden behind the house. Clara's eyes widened as she took it all in. It was far from grand, but it was alive with opportunity. She could imagine herself tending to the animals, planting vegetables, and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Luke noticed her expression and gave a small, approving nod. "You'll get the hang of it," he said simply. "It won't be easy, but you'll learn fast if you pay attention." Clara smiled softly. There was comfort in his calm assurance, a sense that she could trust him to guide her through this new chapter. Their first task was feeding the animals. Clara followed Luke into the barn, where the scent of hay and animals filled the air. Horses neighed softly as they approached, and the cows looked up from their morning grazing. Luke handed her a bucket of feed and demonstrated how to distribute it carefully, explaining which animals needed extra attention. Clara listened intently, watching his every movement, determined not to make mistakes. She poured the feed slowly and evenly, feeling a sense of satisfaction as the animals ate contentedly. Luke watched her for a moment, then nodded. "Not bad for your first time," he said. Clara felt a flush of pride. The work was hard, but it felt meaningful, and she could already sense the rhythm of the ranch beginning to become familiar. As the days passed, Clara's confidence grew. She learned to wake before sunrise, sweep the barn, gather eggs, and milk the cows. She discovered the satisfaction of tending to the garden, planting seeds, and watching them sprout into vibrant vegetables. Luke guided her with patience, correcting her gently when she made mistakes and praising her when she did well. He taught her the importance of observing the animals, noticing their moods and health, and understanding that every living creature had its own needs and rhythms. Clara absorbed every lesson eagerly, her determination to succeed pushing her forward even when she was tired or uncertain. Life on the ranch was not easy. There were long, tiring days when the sun beat down relentlessly, and her hands became sore from work. There were evenings when she would collapse into a chair, exhausted yet satisfied with all she had accomplished. Yet through it all, Clara discovered a strength within herself that she had never fully known. She realized that hard work was not just physical, it was also mental, a test of patience, resilience, and the ability to keep going when things were difficult. And with Luke's quiet support and guidance, she felt capable of meeting every challenge that came her way. One afternoon, as Clara worked in the vegetable garden, she noticed Luke approaching with a calm, steady stride. He carried a small basket of freshly picked vegetables and set it down beside her. "You're getting faster," he said with a faint smile. "And careful, too. That's important." Clara looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without your help," she replied softly. Luke shrugged as if it were nothing, but there was a warmth in his eyes that reassured her. "You're learning." "That's what matters. You'll do fine on your own soon enough." The words encouraged her. She realized that this partnership was not just about work, it was about trust, guidance, and the belief that she could succeed. As the weeks turned into months, Clara became an integral part of the ranch. She learned to ride horses, mend fences, and manage the smaller tasks that kept the farm running smoothly. Luke taught her to handle challenges calmly, to plan her work, and to anticipate problems before they arose. Clara's confidence grew with every day, and she began to take initiative, solving small issues on her own, and finding creative ways to improve the work on the ranch. The skills she had once only dreamed of mastering were becoming second nature, and with each success, her sense of pride and accomplishment grew. But life on the ranch was not only about work. Clara also learned the value of quiet moments, of observing the world around her and finding joy in small details. She would often sit on the porch in the evening, watching the sunset over the fields, listening to the soft sounds of animals settling down for the night. She noticed the way the light shifted, how shadows stretched across the land, and how the air smelled of earth and wildflowers. Luke sometimes joined her, and together they would watch in silence, sharing a simple understanding that did not require words. These moments taught Clara that life's beauty often lay in its simplicity, in the quiet connections and steady rhythms of daily life. Over time, the townspeople began to notice the change in Clara. They saw a young woman who had grown stronger, more confident, and capable. Her eyes no longer held uncertainty. Instead, they shone with determination and pride. People whispered among themselves, commenting on how she had flourished under Luke's guidance, and how the choice to raise a hand at the auction had changed not just her life, but also the way the community viewed courage and responsibility. Clara became a quiet symbol of resilience, proof that patience, hard work, and trust could transform a person's life in ways that words alone could not capture. Through it all, Luke remained steady and patient, guiding her when necessary but allowing her space to grow independently. He taught her that true strength came not from avoiding difficulties, but from facing them with determination and calm. Clara came to respect and admire him, not just for his skill and courage, but for his quiet wisdom and unwavering support. She understood that life's challenges were easier to bear when shared with someone who believed in you, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the trust and guidance Luke had shown her. One chilly morning, as Clara fed the horses in the barn, she paused to reflect on her journey. She thought about the auction square, the uncertainty she had felt, and the long silence of the crowd that had held her future in balance. She realized how far she had come, from a girl standing nervously on a platform unsure of her worth, to a young woman capable, strong, and confident. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling a sense of pride that warmed her despite the cold air. The ranch had become her home, a place where she could grow, learn, and thrive. As the days continued, Clara's bond with Luke grew stronger. They worked side by side, solving problems, managing tasks, and caring for the animals. They laughed together during lighter moments, shared quiet conversations in the evenings, and developed a partnership built on mutual respect and trust. Clara learned not only the practical skills of ranch life, but also the value of patience, perseverance, and kindness. She understood that success was not measured solely by work completed, but by the character built along the way. By the end of the season, Clara had transformed in ways she could hardly have imagined. She moved with confidence, handled tasks with precision, and approached each challenge with a calm determination. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts, and Clara felt a sense of belonging and purpose she had never known before. Luke watched her quietly, proud of her growth and resilience, knowing that she had proven herself not just capable of hard work, but capable of life itself. Clara had found her place, her strength, and a future filled with promise. As the sun set one evening, casting golden light over the fields, Clara stood beside Luke on the porch, looking out at the land they had worked to care for together. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and gratitude. Life on the ranch had taught her more than she could have imagined. Patience, courage, trust, and the power of one person's willingness to believe in another. She realized that her journey had only just begun, and with the skills, confidence, and guidance she had gained, she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The auction square and its doubts felt like a distant memory, replaced by the steady, enduring promise of life on the ranch and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. The morning sun rose slowly over Red Creek, painting the town in warm shades of gold and orange. Clara stood on the porch of the ranch, taking in the fields that stretched out before her. The horses grazed quietly, the chickens wandered through the yard, and the wind carried the familiar scent of earth, hay, and wildflowers. Clara had learned to love these mornings, the quiet moments that felt like a reward after hard work. She had come a long way from the day she had stood nervously on the auction block, uncertain of her future, unsure if anyone would see her worth. Now standing here with the sun on her face, she felt a sense of calm strength, a quiet pride in all she had accomplished. Life on the ranch had shaped her in ways she could hardly have imagined. Each day had taught her something new: how to tend to animals, manage the garden, repair fences, and anticipate problems before they arose. She had discovered a resilience she did not know she possessed, a determination that allowed her to face challenges with courage and patience. Her hands bore the small calluses of labor, and her skin carried the warmth of the sun, both marks of her hard work. But more than the physical changes, Clara felt a transformation within herself. She had grown confident, capable, and self-assured, ready to face whatever life had in store. Luke appeared beside her, carrying a basket of fresh eggs from the henhouse. His face held the same calm, steady expression that had guided her since the first day she had arrived at the ranch. "You're early today," he said quietly, setting the basket down. Clara smiled, feeling the bond of trust and friendship that had grown between them over the months. "I like to start while the day is still fresh," she replied. Luke nodded approvingly. "Good. That's the way to stay ahead of the work, and it shows responsibility. I can see you've really grown into this life." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not just his words, but the recognition that she had earned, the acknowledgement that her hard work had not gone unnoticed. The town had also begun to notice the changes in Clara. People who had once whispered doubts about her abilities now spoke with respect. They saw a young woman who had become strong, skilled, and confident. Some came to the ranch to ask for advice on animal care or gardening, amazed at how much Clara had learned in such a short time. Others would stop to greet her in town, complimenting her on her diligence and determination. Clara had become a symbol in Red Creek, proof that patience, courage, and hard work could transform a life. She carried herself with quiet pride, aware of how far she had come, but never forgetting the kindness that had allowed her to reach this point. Despite her success, Clara remained humble. She knew that it was not just her own efforts that had brought her here, but the guidance and trust of Luke. He had taught her not only practical skills but also the value of patience, perseverance, and integrity. He had shown her that life was not simply about avoiding difficulty, but about facing it with courage and determination. Clara had learned that true strength came from within, but it also required the support of those willing to believe in you. She felt deep gratitude for Luke, understanding that the bond they shared was built on mutual respect, trust, and the willingness to see the best in one another. One day, as Clara worked in the garden, she noticed a group of townspeople approaching. They had heard about her progress on the ranch and wanted to see for themselves how she had grown. Among them were the very people who had stood silently in the auction square, hesitant and unsure. Clara felt a flicker of nervousness, remembering how they had doubted her so long ago. But as she looked at them now, she saw curiosity, admiration, and respect in their eyes. They had come not to judge but to acknowledge what she had achieved. Clara straightened her shoulders, her hand still holding a basket of freshly picked vegetables. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that her efforts had spoken louder than any words ever could. The townspeople observed her working with skill and confidence, noting the ease with which she handled the animals, tended the garden, and managed her tasks. They whispered among themselves, impressed by her dedication and growth. "She's become so capable," one woman remarked. "I can't believe the change in her," another added. Clara listened quietly, a small smile playing on her lips. She did not need their approval, but it was satisfying to see that her hard work and perseverance were recognized. She realized that her journey had inspired others, showing them that courage, patience, and trust could change the course of a life. Luke watched the scene from nearby, a small, quiet smile on his face. He had known all along what Clara was capable of, and he felt proud of her growth. He understood that the true reward of their work together was not just a successful ranch, but the transformation of a young woman who had faced uncertainty with courage and emerged stronger. He walked over to Clara, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You've done well," he said simply. Clara looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied softly. Luke shook his head, a hint of a smile on his lips. "You did it yourself. I only guided you. The strength was always inside you." That evening, as the sun set over the fields, Clara reflected on her journey. She thought about the auction square, the silence of the crowd, and the moment when Luke had raised his hand. She realized that day had been the beginning of everything, the chance that had changed her life, giving her the opportunity to grow, learn, and thrive. She understood now that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet and steady, appearing in a single act that changed the course of a life. And she had been fortunate to witness it firsthand. The months that followed brought new challenges and successes. Clara continued to work alongside Luke, learning new skills, solving problems, and gaining confidence in her abilities. She discovered that life was not always easy, but that hard work, patience, and determination could make even the toughest tasks manageable. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment in every accomplishment, knowing that she had earned her place on the ranch and in the community. The bond she shared with Luke remained strong, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Together, they had created a life filled with purpose, care, and quiet joy. Clara also became a mentor in her own right. She began teaching other young people in the town, showing them the skills she had learned and sharing the lessons of perseverance, responsibility, and courage. She spoke of the importance of hard work, patience, and believing in oneself, inspiring others to pursue their own growth and potential. The story of her journey spread throughout Red Creek, a tale of resilience and hope that reminded everyone that sometimes it only takes one person willing to see the potential in another to change the course of a life. One crisp morning, as Clara prepared to feed the animals, she paused to look out over the fields. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the land she had worked to care for. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. Life had not always been easy, but it had taught her lessons that could never be learned through comfort alone. She had discovered her strength, her resilience, and her ability to thrive in the face of uncertainty. She had learned the value of patience, trust, and courage, and she had learned that one act of kindness, one decision to believe in someone, could change everything. As the townspeople went about their daily routines, they often glanced toward the ranch, now a symbol of dedication and growth. Clara's name was spoken with respect, and her story became a quiet legend, a reminder that courage, hard work, and trust could transform even the most uncertain circumstances. Children looked up to her, inspired by her journey from a timid, uncertain girl to a strong, capable young woman. Adults admired her perseverance and skill, recognizing that her achievements were the result of determination, guidance, and the willingness to seize opportunity when it appeared. By the end of the season, Clara stood at the edge of the fields, looking out at the land she had nurtured. The animals grazed peacefully, the garden flourished, and the ranch thrived under her care. She felt a sense of accomplishment and pride, knowing that she had grown not only in skill, but also in confidence, resilience, and understanding. The girl who had once been offered for half price was now a young woman with a future full of promise, respect, and opportunity. She had taken the chance given to her and turned it into a life filled with growth, learning, and quiet triumph. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the fields, Clara felt a sense of peace. She had come a long way from the auction block, from the silence of the crowd, and from the uncertainty that had once defined her life. She had grown strong, capable, and confident, and she had learned that courage, kindness, and trust were the keys to unlocking potential. The story of her journey, the lone cowboy who believed in her, the hard work that shaped her, and the community that came to recognize her worth, would remain in Red Creek for years to come, a testament to the power of hope, perseverance, and human kindness. Clara turned toward Luke, who had been quietly observing her from the porch. She smiled, a mixture of gratitude, pride, and joy in her expression. Luke returned the smile, his quiet confidence and steady presence, a reminder that her journey had always been supported by those willing to see her true potential. Together, they looked out over the fields, knowing that this was only the beginning of a life filled with opportunity, growth, and purpose. The auction block was far behind her now, replaced by a future shaped by courage, determination, and the simple yet powerful act of someone believing in her.